Okay, so good morning and welcome everyone who has joined us today in this webinar. So my name is Rahul Rawat and I work as recruiting manager at MyMobiLife. So, and taking care of staffing and new business developments. We are a Georgia-based small but rapidly growing staffing company. We do option IT and digital marketing stuff, staffing with big tech firms like IBM and some SMBs among others. I'm very excited today to host this webinar with my co-speaker, Michelle Research, Chief HR Officer as MyMobiLife. Michelle, very good morning and thank you so much for being with me. Please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Michelle Richard. I am the Chief Human Resource Officer for MyMobiLife. I'm excited to talk to you guys about some of the changes we've seen in the HR realm relative to post-COVID transitioning to some more flexible workplace environments for managers and businesses. So hopefully have an opportunity to cover that with you guys today. And then obviously if we have any questions, happy to answer those as well. But thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. So through this short and interesting webinar, we will be throwing light on the hiring trends in 2022, and we will try to find out the reason, 2-3 vital and prevalent concerns that touches any organization, irrespective of what sectors they are serving, whether they are serving IT or non-functional, functional. These 3 questions, I think, will be touching every organization, and things have changed so drastically after Corona and pandemic. So first of all, after this short webinar, because we are going to cover this webinar in just 30 minutes, we don't have much time, but we will try to make it as much as interactive and meaningful. And after that, we will be having a 10 minutes QA sessions where audience can raise their question. If they have any query, they can just post that into the comment section and we will try to answer that as best as we can. The first thing is that why are companies struggling to attract talent? And I think this is the very important question here. Because after Corona, there was a news of great resignation, and again there were skill shortages, and most importantly, lack of good candidate experience. So I will try to share my thoughts on why our company is struggling. So let us. So we see that after Corona, like people were laid off, and many of them realized that if we don't have a demand, if we don't have a demand, we cannot ensure supply. And they remained unemployed for what, almost 18 months. So after that, they realized that they need to change their skill set, evaluate themselves, and another things. So now today is a totally an employee market. Now it's not an employee market. People are smart these days, and you cannot just attract them with a good salary and just work from home. They are expecting something beyond that. And so this is the number one reason. So after after Corona, people realize that their jobs are not stable. They can be laid off anytime. So now they are looking for better opportunities and better options where they have more flexibilities. And second thing is that also there is some skill shortage also. Companies are finding hard time to find talent because talented people are not like sticking at one place after 1 to 2 years. They are just moving to more and more better places. So I think this and another thing is that companies who are taking too much time for interview process or tedious hiring process, people are not generally liking that. So this is what I call a lack of good candidate experience. So I think these are the 3 reasons for which companies are struggling even after they are providing remote work. But this is very common these days, right? And so people want a good experience where they can be like valued for their skill set and they can maintain their work and life balance. So I think this is the reason. I may not be completely right, but as per my opinion, as per my research, these are the reasons companies are struggling to attract talent. So Michelle, would you like to agree with me that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree is that at this point, you really kind of see the shift in power dynamics between previously employers had a lot more leverage what they have currently, particularly
Yes, yes.
this phase called the Great Resignation. So in doing that, employers really have to acquiesce a lot more to employee demands or employee concerns. They really have to start looking at the totality of the employee experience. And we saw a lot of that through COVID when through Zoom and other virtual platforms, you're kind of getting insight and inside looks into where people live, how they live, their family dynamics, who they have to care for. So ultimately, I think it's all about how can we improve that employee experience, not just when you have a need and have a slide and have a position to fill, but how do you ensure that you are creating a happy, productive, whole employee so that they want to stay with you and do the work.
Absolutely right. And so, like, Marcel, I would like to ask you one thing. Like, if you would like to share your thoughts as to how things have changed the workplace, let's say work environment, management, and job scopes have evolved post-COVID. All from employer perspective. I know you have been spent a lot of times into the corporate area. So I think you must be very experienced with that. So how things have changed according to you, the like workplace and environment?
So I think that's a really good segue to kind of the part of the presentation that you wanted me to address. And ultimately, what we've seen as employers is COVID kind of sped up and accelerated a lot of what I'm calling macro trends in business management and hiring. You already had requests for remote work. You already had requests for flexibility. You already had requests for negotiations for more vacation time, more personal time, et cetera. So ultimately, what COVID did was it accelerated those requests and ultimately had employers put in a position where they had to start strongly considering these requests in order to not just acquire talent, but to retain talent as well. And what you're seeing now, and Rahul's exactly right, is employees are focusing on two main things, and that's flexibility and safety. And I'm sorry. Okay, I had a question already. So I do want to kind of address just the final points of what that looks like from a business management and employee standpoint. And ultimately, after months and months and months of garnering insight to how you manage employees, how you manage through these sort of life-changing, tilting the earth off its axis events, as employers, you have to pivot and you have to adapt and you have to do so in a way where you're able to maintain the culture of your business, but also ensure that you're taking care of your employees at the same time. And there's sometimes some tension between the two. And hopefully I can give you some insight into how to manage through that today. But what you're mostly seeing, and I have these into kind of four big conceptual themes: acceleration, innovation, reflection, and retention. And I touched a little bit on acceleration earlier, which is COVID having accelerated it, what HR we're calling macro trends. And where you're really seeing that is when it comes to requests for remote work. Obviously, we all understand whether it was through the mandatory quarantines or just other guidance that we received in social distancing, et cetera, is that remote work is now it used to be kind of a catalog type item for employees to request. Now you see employees demanding a lot more flexibility, whether it be a hybrid model of working where I'm into the office once a week or twice a week, but we'll do remote work for the remainder of the week, or ultimately just working remotely for the entirety of the time that they're with you. So remote work has really kind of taken precedent in terms of how employees are viewing the workplace. And as companies, you kind of had to have that shift from a technology standpoint. Again, you saw the platforms we had to leverage and utilize, whether it be Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts, et cetera. But you also saw in that a cultural shift, meaning you had less and less people in the seats doing the whole, I'm going to go get coffee for 10 minutes, or I'm going to have, FaceTime with this person for 10 minutes. You really had to leverage those different platforms to create a culture, but do so virtually, but in a way that was still substantial and meaningful and impactful to the employee. So remote work is a big way that you've seen changes in the workplace. And then also just from an HR perspective, implicit in that are ADA and FMLA concerns, because whether it be somebody catching COVID or having to caregive for somebody with COVID, or somebody who's recovering and has long COVID, there are bona fide ADA and FMLA concerns that employers have to respond to and plan for. So if you don't have an accommodation process, if you don't have a leave process or leave policy, you really need to make sure that you're implementing those things to fully address employees who may need some accommodation, whether it be a change in their schedule, a change in their routine, a change in their job responsibilities. And as an employer, to protect yourself, make sure that you have those processes documented. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is how we change with workplace innovations. One of the things that COVID did teach us, in effect, was the fact that a lot of the processes we had in place, some of them were dated. It may have been just the way they've always done things. And through COVID, a lot of employers, particularly those who thrived and did well, had to pivot more substantially, more quickly, more efficiently, and more in real time than a lot of employers did. And I say that as somebody who came from trucking, because it was difficult for that industry to make that same sort of pivot. And employers that did well made that pivot seamlessly, whether it be doing more virtual, online, paperless, but really looking at the why and the how you do things and making sure that however you're doing them, that the answer to that is not just that's how we've always done it, but instead this is how we're doing it today, and this is how we can improve it two days from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, but constantly thinking of how to better your processes and improve what you're doing. The other thing that COVID impacted was workplace culture. It could be from a standpoint of the need to social distance. It could be from the standpoint of having to, all your team being virtual and your team being remote. But ultimately, you're really seeing this shift. And Rahul touched on it when he talked about the great resignation. There's a lot more emphasis on what's called dignity of work, where it's not so much about a paycheck, even though obviously people approve and want to be paid and compensated for their work. But how do you treat your employees? How are you making sure that when they come to work, they feel challenged and stretched and not burnt out or exploited or taken advantage of? How are you managing them to their full potential? How are you taking care of them? And I mentioned earlier about the totality of the employee and making sure that you understand that this isn't just some commodity that's in your organization. This is a whole person with whole person problems, with whole person experience, with whole person, emotions and potential in the future. So how are you addressing those things, particularly as it relates to mental health? Because one of the other aspects that we've all been addressing post-COVID, and post seems a little bit optimistic, but that's how I'm going to describe it, is burnout and stress. And whether it be from the disruptions of, schools being out, schools being in, schools being out again, or not being able to travel, or not being able to see family, or not being able to kind of do normal like we're accustomed to, employers have to have a bona fide mental health approach to how you're going to assist your employees, and not just burden them with work and not just burden them with assignments, but it really kind of comes to what is your EQ as opposed to your IQ, and how you're managing employees. And one of the last things I'll touch on before I kind of hand this back over to Rahul, because obviously I had time for questions, but the whole caregiving aspect. Previously to that, there were a lot of assumptions made about who did most of the caregiving in any situation. And what COVID revealed is that there's a lot of inequity in terms of those caregiving responsibilities. And again, whether it be caregiving for your immediate family, caregiving for your parents, caregiving for kind of all of those individuals covered by FMLA or covered under ADA, caregiving is another component of adding to that mental stress and adding to that totality of the employee. And how are you managing around? Are you ensuring that you have flexible arrangements for people? Are you ensuring you're giving them some grace in your policy so that way you're consistent in who you're giving grace to and who you're allowing to take time off to take care of these things? So ultimately, as employers, how are you creating an environment for the whole employee? How are you taking care of them? Because it's not just about COVID. There are different, I'm going to call it disasters, that take place and things you have to plan for, which kind of leads to the very last point, which is around disaster planning. If you don't have a plan in place, if you don't have a succession plan, if you don't have an org chart, if you don't have opportunities for cross training, what will your plan be if something like this similar hits again? Because again, it doesn't have to be COVID. It could be a natural disaster like a hurricane. We saw that a lot when we had companies in Louisiana, or an earthquake in California. So what is your plan to handle this sort of massive disruption to your business so that way your business isn't negatively impacted and your employees still feel stable and still feel like they're in a good environment?
I think that was so insightful. I learned that. So I have one question here, Michelle, if you would like to answer that. Now, I think every company is offering remote work because they understand that people just want that. They do not want to commute and they just want to maintain their work and life balance. But what I see that even tech companies and other companies are reopening their offices So what according to you is going to be the future of the work? It is going to be absolutely remote for the coming years, or it is going to be, let's say, hybrid or some other model?
Well, I think a lot of it is industry specific, right? I mean, if you work in retail and you're a cashier at a store, obviously you don't have the option to work remote. But if that option is taken away, how else are you going to take care of that employee? Obviously, if you're a salaried employee or have jobs where your clients can be anywhere, or your customers can be anywhere, or your managers can be anywhere, working remote is an option that you have, and obviously, I think it's one that you should take advantage of to the extent that you can, because it's always existed. It's just a matter of who they let engage in remote work and what the process was. Now the bar is high for you denying somebody's request for remote work because you've already let them do it based on COVID for 6 months. So to the extent that somebody now comes to you and says, I want to work remote, what is your basis for saying no? And if it's steeped in some kind of archaic or draconian, well, we just don't do that anymore, you're going to lose that employee to somebody who does allow them to work remotely. But for the people who can't, you have to provide them with some other incentives, right? Whether it be increased personal time, increased vacation time, some additional coursework. I mean, you see that where some businesses are paying for college courses now to ensure the employee can continue to grow and challenge themselves and do more and better. So ultimately, you kind of have to handle it from both sides. If you can work remote and allow people to work remote, you absolutely should. If you can't, you have to find other ways to incentivize them.
The other day I was, it just came to my mind. The other day I was reading an article where companies are trying to even provide pet insurance, because they understand that remote is not just the lucrative point, right? You have to provide something extra because everyone is doing that. So companies are even trying to find the different ways. How do you attract talent and how do you retain them, right? Because it's really, really a tough market ever than before, because people are more cautious about their skills and they understand that they can be laid off anytime. So, last time there was a news of 800 employees led by Better.com. So people are just very, very smart these days, and they understand that if someone is not valuing their skills, they will move on to next company. So people, rather than hiring people, just need and companies should focus on retaining these employees. How do you retain them? This is another very important things that we should, I think, lay emphasis on that.
No, you're exactly right. These are things that you have to start. Employers have to consider. I remember having conversations with in the industry and even outside the industry and some of the focus groups I was in, which is people just don't want to work. And people kind of throw that out there and say that people don't want to work. That's not true. People do want to work, but ultimately they get to select you now instead of you selecting them. So what are you offering? What does your pay look like? What do your benefits look like? What are your incentives? Because if you're not competitive on those marks, then you're not going to be able to find people, because what you're not providing, somebody else will. And, considering the fact that, since the 1920s, it's been fairly commonplace, and the American way of working has been 5 days a week, 9 to 5, no exception. It's just kind of how we've done it. And COVID came in and disrupted that entire model, because maybe you don't need to work 5 days a week. Maybe you don't need to work 9 to 5. Maybe you only need to work 4 days a week, and you need to work 9 to 1 one day and 6 to 12 the other day. So ultimately, what you are not providing, somebody else will. And employers just need to always think about you're selling a position, you're selling your company, you're selling your product to these employees the same way you would to a customer. So what are you selling?
I think to conclude this, and I think I learned from you, it's totally an employee market. It's not an employer market. You just need to put yourself in the shoes of employee if you want to attract them, right? I think this is how the things will work. Treat the employees as if you would like to treat yourself. I think this is totally the summary or conclusion of this discussion today. So, and I think we are just proceeding to the Q&A session. So, if viewers, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave in the comment section. Michelle and I will try to answer. So, but I don't see any question yet. So, let's wait. And I know. So anyway, but I think we are recording this, right? We are recording this. So after this webinar, those who have registered, recording link will be sent to you. And if you have any feedback or question, you can drop in the email section also. Later on, that's not a problem. But we really appreciate your presence today. and we just want your encouragement. And hopefully, we will come up with the next session in the upcoming months. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you.
I think we have some 9 minutes also, so we can wait.
I think you got a question.
Sure. I think somebody raised a question. Yeah. So this question is from Rashid Ali. Thank you, Rashid. How can we improve our skills? I think this is a very broad question. So I would like to answer that. So first of all, to improve our skills, we need to understand what exactly we want. Number one, what exactly we want, and another things to improve skills, we have to once we decide that what we want, what we are good at, what we love to do, we need to invest some time to improve those skills. But the first thing is that you need to decide what you love to do. Suppose if you love coding, then you have decided you love coding, then you should invest your time every day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's not that you can sit in one day or one night and learn that. I think the number one principle to improve skill, I think, is to love and then practice, and you will definitely improve. So you would like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's perfectly said. The only thing I would add from an employer standpoint is this could be another opportunity for you to provide an incentive to individuals who want to work for you, to the extent that you have the capacity and the ability to provide some additional training or provide some community college courses or some certifications. There's obviously some organizations who provide those services to businesses, and you could ultimately partner with them to have this sort of thing available. Another option is tuition payback. I've seen that work a lot of places, to the extent you have individuals who elect to pursue getting a college degree. Some businesses do tuition buybacks, or they do loan forgiveness for some people who already have their degree. So ultimately, it just depends on how you can incentivize and retain your employees. And if these are options for you, the things you can do, that would be great. Hey, Rahul, if I could, since we have some time, I guess there's a couple of things that I can mention real quick, just since we have a few minutes and don't have any questions yet. One of the things that I didn't really talk about, which is around vaccinations, because obviously that's kind of a third world topic of discussion, but really relevant to what we're talking about, because sometimes whether or not you require vaccinations or you're in an area that requires vaccinations, that can be a prohibitor or an incentive for somebody to decide to work for you. And the only thing that I would say as it relates to vaccinations, just make sure that you're clear in your communication. Obviously, some people have very visceral reactions to what they consider to be a mandate, but to the extent that it's required by your state or the business decision's been made to do so, only thing I would advise is that you have some impartial party or person be able to administer your program, so that way an employee doesn't feel as though they have to go to their manager or to their HR team, because for whatever reason, people feel like there's some judgment implied in that, and they get penalized if they have to go to somebody they work closely with. So I would just say, just from a camaraderie standpoint, maybe from a less drama standpoint, to the extent that you can outsource that or have a third party take care of it, or an impartial, non-HR related, non-manager related function take care of your vaccine policy, that will probably be best, because it allows you kind of stay above and you don't kind of get drugged down into the politics of propaganda of kind of what's happened with vaccines. So I just wanted to make sure I added that, because that's obviously the other part to our discussion on how COVID has impacted the workplace, which is the whole aspect of vaccinations.
I think there is another question from Rashid. Can you tell us when should one switch one's current company? How can he know this is the right time for switching, this right opportunity for him? I think this is a very good question. Misal, would you like to cover that in 1 minute? There is a question from Rashid.
I think, I'm sorry. I think it just really depends, right? I mean, again, I think we're in an environment where employees have a lot more leverage and a lot more autonomy than kind of what they had in the past. So if you don't feel as though you don't see a future for yourself at the company, you're not able to stretch and grow, you not feel like you're learning, there's other opportunities available to you because let's be honest, all employees have access to LinkedIn and Indeed and kind of other job boards where they can see what some of these opportunities are. But I would say that before you leave, that you in fact speak to your employer and give them an opportunity to maybe counter or see if there's some other incentives or programs maybe you don't know about, or maybe they just haven't been advertised and marketed the way that they should. So, but I think it just really depends on, again, looking at the totality of the experience of the employee. How do you feel when you go to work? Do you hate going to work? Do you enjoy going to work? Do you look forward to it? Do you feel like there's a future for you there? If not, I mean, I think it's a pretty easy decision for an employee to make.
I think it's 11:30, we are done. So once again, thank you everyone, those who joined us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave in the, you can drop us an email also after that webinar. In the 1 to 2 days, you will be getting a recorded version of this webinar. So you can watch it later on. If you miss that, you can watch it anytime. And after that, if you have any query, we are always happy to have your queries and questions. Thank you so much once again. And Michelle, really thank you so much. And everyone, those who joined us. Bye-bye.